I'm sure you've all seen the many benefits of fostering a creative workplace. It sparks innovation, it boosts creativity, it contributes to growth. Fostering creativity, though, is especially challenging during uncertain times, such as the time we're in right now, rife with political turmoil, wars, climate change, and more. According to neuroscientist and faculty member of New York University, Wendy Suzuki, innovation and creativity are influenced by the parts of the brain that control memory and emotions like fear. When a person feels fearful, such as during a time of uncertainty, their ability to be creative is compromised. This is when the anxious mindset to save oneself takes over and stops the curious brain from looking for opportunities to innovate, learn, and grow. The good news is that there's an antidote to that phenomenon, which is something we'll be discussing along with many other keys to unleashing creativity. Hello and welcome to PowerSpeaking Live. I'm Carrie Beckstrom, the host of this monthly series and the CEO of PowerSpeaking Incorporated. And I am so eager to get into this conversation with you and explore the many ways in which we can spark and support creativity in the workplace. And as we embark on this discussion, I urge you to think about and share in chat, as many of you already have, the various things in your experience that foster creativity and the things that get in the way, such as the example that I just shared. We already have Mary sharing that basic trust and respect, yes, is essential to fostering creativity and freedom of expression. We have with us two expert panelists who I know are eager to delve into this topic. First up, we have Stephen Kowalski. Stephen is a leader of the global product development team at Genentech, one of PowerSpeaking's long-standing clients. Stephen is also an organizational development consultant, a speaker, an executive coach, and author. Stephen recently released this new book, Creative Together, Sparking Innovation in the New World of Work. And Stephen, one of the many things that I appreciated about your book is that you led with a story of failure, because it's often in those times of our life in which we experience some of our greatest lessons and discoveries.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me. Great to be here, Carrie, and welcome Dawn as well. I'm so looking forward to dig into the topic. And learning to learn from failure, one of the keys that we'll be talking a little bit more about later.
Terrific. And we included a link to Stephen's book in chat, so you can check that out. Also joining us is Dawn Bryan. Dawn is the Senior Vice President of the Global Practice at the Kaleidoscope, a DEI consulting firm. Dawn has also served as a trusted advisor for over 2 years to me personally and to our organization as we strive to ensure that PowerSpeaking is a diverse, equitable, and inclusive place to work. And Dawn, it's a treat to be able to work with you in a slightly different capacity.
It is a joy. I've been looking forward to this. Last week we had a run through and it was so much fun. I thought, oh, this is just going to be a delight, even if it's just the three of us in the room. So I've been really looking forward to this. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's start broad. Stephen, would you share your views on creativity in the workplace today? What's fueling it and what's getting in the way, such as uncertain times?
Yes, sure. I think you hit on one of those things, the level of chaos, not just complexity, but chaos that we're experiencing is influencing the conditions under which creativity might emerge, right? And then there's maybe a shifting direction, right? Because purpose is such an important component in driving creative action and activating our creativity. And as a direction keeps changing or the landscape keeps changing, right, that can be really disruptive if the purpose is either not articulated clearly or can't be articulated clearly because it keeps changing, right? So I think we could all say creativity is needed more than ever now. I mean, new technology like artificial intelligence and GP chat and all of this this explosion of technology in our lives and the complexity that we're all managing, and then sometimes the chaos, right? And so needed more than ever, and yet still misunderstood. Creativity still misunderstood. And if we agree that creativity is the driver for innovation, and innovation is a type of creative result, then we really need to double down and focus on, getting a better understanding of what really activates creativity, making a distinction between what we've been told or learned in what I call the old story, and now shifting into this new story. What is creativity really? Who are we as creative creators, and how do we create more effectively together? Because we really need to.
We do indeed. And I want to get into that in more detail in just a minute. And I really appreciate you sharing the power of purpose. And I think, and I to your point, when there's so much uncertainty and constant change, sometimes articulating that purpose really clearly can be difficult. However, I think that's one of the key things as leaders that is essential for us to do, to be as clear about that purpose as possible, which can bring focus and I think help mitigate some of that uncertainty if we're really focused on that purpose that we're all rallying around together. Dawn, what would you like to add?
We help people come together across lines of difference to work together better. And our clients are often global, large organizations with teams at many locations. And so, Stephen, I'm going to add 3 C's to the one that you put out there, which was chaos, right? Or chaos and complexity. Some of the challenges that we see clients have in their work, not just in creativity and innovation, but our connection, communication, and of course, cross-cultural. And so, in the connection, thinking about how do we help the team feel connected, both in the work that they're doing, the purpose that Stephen mentioned, but also relationally, especially across really disparate time zones. Then communication, how do we help people and teams communicate more effectively? And that includes things like digital tools, but also when we're speaking different first languages. And then overlaying all of that, of course, is always the cross-cultural piece. So a remote team that might be disparate across many locations is trying to build the communication and connection. And then they also might have the added challenge of different values and beliefs and styles and accepted behaviors. And then you throw in there the social things that are happening, that chaos in the world, the different views on politics or wars or all of that. But I would say that those challenges can also be the fuel to greater creativity and innovation, because technology has opened up entirely new possibilities in relation to teaming. And so it allows an entirely new set of people to be in the room together. And if they had to be in person, they wouldn't be able to swing it because of practicalities. But you can get a group of people from around the world. Even on my team, we have someone from Scotland, Australia, Albania, Portugal, South Africa, and 3 time zones in the US. And we can all be together to communicate, collaborate, and create. So challenges and opportunities both.
Most definitely. Oh my gosh, Dawn, a lot of what you said there relates to the antidote to the phenomenon that I discussed at the outset. I mentioned that it's proven that uncertainty can lead to fear, which can stifle creativity. The antidote is to have an attitude of abundance and gratitude, which can help to lessen that fear and increase one's ability to be creative. And I think that's a very hopeful message and so important for leaders to think about, that one of the keys to trying to unleash that creativity is to try to foster an environment of collaboration and gratitude, which can lead to creativity even when resources are sparse. That being said, what if you're just not a creative person? I mean, some hold the belief that creativity is an ability that you inherently have or you don't. In reading your book, Stephen, I know you have a very different perspective on this. That's, of course, grounded in a lot of research. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. And this is what I referred to earlier when I talked about the old story and the new story. When I was doing my research for my doctoral dissertation, I found that the roots of our collective understanding about creativity come from a lot of literature in the 40s and 50s that place creativity in the vein of giftedness. And you find our articles on creativity in journals of giftedness. And what I was struck by was how elitist this conversation was. And I talk about this in Creative Together, how elitist this conversation was in contrast to what we were learning in the School of Education about how different dominant viewpoints advantage some and disadvantage others. And so I found myself searching for a way of thinking about creativity that was more egalitarian, that was, that had equity within it. And that was driving me. And what I discovered in my research was seeds of this new story that say that creativity is actually a potential and not an ability. If we see it as an ability, and I see this almost every time I work with groups, if I ask them to line up, on a continuum between not creative at all and highly creative, that everyone will form a bell curve. It happens every single time. There's a bunch of people in the middle and a few people on either end, right? And I think that illustrates kinesthetically our embodiment of this mindset that creativity is an ability. When we think of it as a potential, then it's all about the circumstances. And we no longer have to say, I'm highly creative, you're not, or you're less creative than me. We don't have to compare. We are all creative beings, and we have this potential at our disposal. And there are inner conditions that might help or hinder our activation of this incredible potential that we have. there are outer conditions. So we talked a little bit about some of the outer conditions, right? Chaos, uncertainty, a manager who, squashes my ideas, a feeling like it's not safe to speak up, all kinds of things. And the outer world can influence a lack of a clear purpose, right? All of these things in the outer world, but there's also things in the inner world that influence whether or not the conditions are right for creativity to emerge. So when we see it as a potential, we don't have to compare. We don't have to have magazine covers that say the 50 most creative people in the world, because we're all as creative as the circumstances in our life call it forward. Let me pause there. It's the new story.
I'm embracing it. It certainly is a very empowering concept to think about. So I'd love to discuss more the circumstances, and to your point, both inner and external, that are essential to unleashing that potential within ourselves as leaders and across teams. Dawn, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, thinking about what creates, unleashes this power of creativity. I think working with teams and people who are very different and trying to bring them up together across those lines of difference over the last 30 years has shown us two things that are essential. And the first is valuing diversity, making difference the secret to the success. It's not just valuing the different experiences and backgrounds, insights, perspectives, and skills of the people on the team, but really leveraging those. So those differences actually help a team make critical shifts that I think lead to the kind of creativity and innovation and problem solving that Stephen talks about in his book. Those differences, those shifts are only possible when people who are different come together in a space. If we use the three of us as an example, right? So Carrie, Stephen, me, if we were going to work together, we could get an idea that none of us would have been able to come up with on our own, because it's by being together that it comes into being. The three of us are fairly alike in some ways, I'm going to guess, right? Age, maybe, nationality, cultural background. So imagine what could spark in a room when you increase the diversity, when there are multiple cultures and ages and nationalities and other dimensions of diversity. So I think having that diversity is important. Probably one way to leverage that diversity is that people on the team know that the uniquenesses that they bring are valued, and they understand the inherent value of the other voices in the room. So they're valued because they bring themselves, they bring their ideas. Doesn't mean that their idea will be the answer, but that's not the point, because the answer is contributing to the team getting the answer. So I would say valuing diversity. And then the second thing that we know, and Carrie, you've already hit on this, is having high levels of trust. And some of the things that contribute to high levels of trust on the team are that egos are low. Stephen, you mentioned leaders and the critical role that they play. I think having leaders with low egos is super helpful to building trust, where people feel like they are able to speak up and ask questions and make mistakes and suggest new ideas without fear of negative consequences. And Carrie, that's that psychological safety. And another factor that builds trust, one of my colleagues says, we can wrestle an idea without wrestling people. And I think that's essential.
Mm-hmm.
And this idea of trust and psychological safety, it directly impacts the way that employees feel about their work and their overall satisfaction. So Accenture did a study a couple of years ago, and they found that employees who feel psychologically safe report 76% more engagement, 50% more productivity, 75% less stress, and 30% more life satisfaction. So those are two things we know are essential. When diversity isn't valued on the team and where there isn't trust, people expend cognitive, emotional, physical energy suppressing parts of themselves or trying to manage dynamics in the room, tiptoeing to avoid minefields, and it's exhausting. So, but if we're free to be who we are because we know that it's appreciated, then imagine the energy that can be used for innovation, creativity, teamwork, productivity, and the joy that comes out while people are doing it.
Wonderful. There's a lot there. So the two things you hit on, of course, Dawn, is really valuing and embracing and seeking a very, very diverse team, a very diverse organization. That, of course, is not enough. Ensuring that it's an inclusive environment where there's high levels of trust and psychological safety so that everyone truly believes that their voice and their input is valued. And there's a lot there to make sure that you create that type of environment and culture. I'd like to touch briefly on something you brought up, especially knowing that both of you have extensive experience with executive coaching. Dawn, you talked about the importance of leaders with their ego intact. Can you share advice or examples of work, both of you, that you've done with leaders to help raise awareness of where maybe their ego is getting in the way, and what kinds of things you've done from a coaching perspective to help lower the temperature?
John, you want to go first, or should I? Yeah, well, I'll start. So I think, and I talk about this in the second adventure of Creative Together, the trappings of ego in organizational life, right? So some of the things I look for are resistance and the roots of resistance. Healthy resistance that makes our ideas better is great, like digging in, questioning, right? But resisting for political reasons or resisting because I'm not sure how that is going to impact my territory, right? So I look for resistance. I look for people who are seeking credit, because if we're really going to start co-creating more effectively, we need to let go of our need for credit and receiving credit. So I look for leaders who are trying to jockey for credit. I look for behaviors like protecting. I can't share that with you right now because it isn't finished or it hasn't been approved, or, you don't have access, or, so this constellation of ego-related behaviors that are about protecting, seeking credit, resisting, right? I call that organizational sludge. And I think that those are what I look for. And I'll give you an example. Like a leader who was very focused on making sure that everyone knew the great work that their department was doing, was talking in terms of and communicating with the organization in ways that sounded like we're going to bring people along, right? And so when I was coaching that leader, I asked a simple question: What's the difference between bringing people along and standing together? And what would standing together help you achieve that bringing people along, if that sort of, almost like comes out of you, like people can smell it and feel it, right? And what's that difference? So a very powerful question that helps reflect these egoistic behaviors can be really helpful in a coaching situation.
Great. Excellent. We've got a lot of discussion going on here in chat, so let's hit on some of this. Mary asks, how do you think the impact of working from home impacts creativity?
Such a good question.
Go ahead, Dawn. You want to?
Yeah, I'm thinking, and I'm going to be thinking out loud here. So, Mary, bear with me. I think there's a variety of data that has been done, research that's been done. And so the verdict is still out, right, on whether remote working makes teams more creative or less creative. There was a recent study done by the University of Pennsylvania, and they found that yes, remote teams tended not to come up with dynamic, innovative solutions, but they found there was a reason. And it was because the teams that they studied those remote teams were mostly doing technical work. They weren't the ones who were tasked to do the innovative things. That was the teams who were in person were given those kinds of assignments. So it wasn't necessarily because those teams were remote. So I think we have to be careful when looking at studies, because there are so many variables that go into it. And, the tools that you use, how often you meet. Are you meeting when someone, it's 2 a.m. for them, right? Or even 11 p.m. for them, and it's 7 a.m. for somebody else. And so, are you making it possible for people to be present in their best possible way? I think as leaders, our job is to help our teams do their best possible work. And so that's in person or remotely. So figuring out how to help your team do the best possible work together so that they have good connection, they have effective communication, they're managing their cross-cultural differences, and you're also limiting the chaos from coming into the organization. That's my off-the-cuff answer.
Yeah, I might add structures of accountability, and when there's strong structures of accountability, I know who the decision maker is. We have a work product owner for this piece of work who is helping shape the process and the journey we're on together to bring something forward. Accountability structures are key, and then there's also the piece about what kind of work am I doing. Am I doing heads down work? And if I'm, at my home office, that maybe I don't have to drive in for that heads down work. Or if I'm in like logistics and execution, and we're meeting in a team for logistics and execution and planning and so forth, maybe that's easier from home. Or I'm working on a team right now in a project at Roche, and there's someone from Australia, Kuala Lumpur, India, Basel, the UK, Switzerland, the UK, and me here in the East Coast of Florida, right? I don't need to be in the office for that work. And the collaborative tools that are getting smarter and smarter every day are really helping us learn to express our creativity in a different way, in a way that is virtual and hybrid. And also, there are times when it's just fantastic to be together. And, I'm fully remote in Florida. I miss my colleagues. I miss those interactions that happen. So, I think we're learning how to express our creativity in new formats and new ways through new technology. So that's how I think about it.
Excellent. And I want to get to a few more of the comments on this subject. I'll just add that one of the things we've talked about is that one of the keys to fostering creativity is to foster collaboration. And in working from home, if you're not intentional about how that collaboration and connection works, it can feel somewhat isolating. So I think regardless of whether you're in your home, in an office, it's more being very, very intentional about how you bring people together virtually, in person, et cetera, so that they can collaborate. There was a point I was going to make. Oh, and the other thing to bear in mind is there's a lot of upside with both of you touched on. In an in-person environment, it is a lot more difficult to gather diverse perspectives and voices from around the globe. If you go into a virtual world, all the better in terms of bringing in more diversity, more voices, more perspective. And I love that Beth Zamparini has agreement on this. As 100% remote employee for 18 months, I've been pushing organizations to support off-site innovation sessions. Reality is that even on-site teams are joining most calls from their cubes and offices. Yeah, right. So it's not about the structure; it's about the processes and tools that you have in place. So, a few more questions here. From a business perspective, I think customers play a role in unleashing creativity. Communication with, collaborating with, and listening to them is critical, most definitely. I have found success. Yeah.
Sorry, could I jump in on that one? One thing that I was interested in sharing when we were talking about the conditions, and it relates to this piece as well, some of the essential conditions, like we think creativity often is about coming up with ideas, but it's actually more complicated than that. When we have a meaningful purpose that requires something different than the status quo, we then dance between constraints and possibilities. And I think that when we are more inclusive, for example, with customers, we might hear about constraints that are really important for us to know about so that our solutions are more viable in the ecosystem, right? We might also hear about great possibilities, ideas that our customers have, right? And our job is to dance in the intersection of purpose, possibility, and constraint. That's actually where creativity happens. It's the coming up with ideas is only one part of it, and it can't live by itself. That's not really so that's another myth about creativity that we have to bust, that it's about coming up with ideas. It's actually ideas in relationship to the constraints like gravity, and sometimes those constraints are obstacles, and those constraints themselves, like a lack of trust, might actually give rise to possibilities. If I have a strong purpose and one of my constraints is a lack of trust, I'm going to start to imagine possibilities that help me move to a place where there's greater trust in my life. That might mean leaving a team, leaving a job, right? And sometimes those are hard realities, but it's this intersection of these three factors. And then, of course, customers, peers. Sometimes we don't think end to end in our value chain. And so we limit the inclusiveness and the input that we get for both constraints and possibilities.
Wonderful. So purpose, constraints, and possibilities, three key elements that need to be explored to unleash that creative potential that we all have. To get something a little bit more kind of concrete and practical, and you touched on a lot of these things, Stephen, but kind of to bring it all together, can you talk a little bit about the model that Genentech has in place to help ensure that a wide range of viewpoints and ideas are taken into account for any given initiative? What are some of the elements that make that work or don't?
Yeah. I mentioned the accountability structure earlier. Knowing who has the decision. We say who has the D. There are signs up around campus in rooms, and when we're virtual, we have to remember it ourselves, right? Who has the decision? And we have a single decision maker model that says someone needs to be accountable for making the decision. And the process that we go through is one of casting a wide net for input, not a carelessly wide net for input, but a carefully thought out a net for input, and then taking all that in as appreciations and considerations. And I think this is a key, because a lot of people, like they think, if I'm going to give you my input, you better do something with it, right? And there was a leader that I interacted with a little while ago who said, I gave them all my input and then they didn't use it. And so why did they even ask me? Well, that's that ego coming back in, right? So who is the decision maker? Who has that ultimate accountability? Who are we going to gather input from? And when those people share input, they share them as appreciations and considerations. And sharing it as a consideration really acknowledges that I know who the decision maker is, and I'm going to share that and let you do what you need to do with it, right? And then, of course, the decision has to be made. And one of the things we forget to do is to go back to those folks who we gathered input from and share how their input impacted our decision making. And that sharing back often is a critical key to aligning people after a decision has been made, even if there was some contentiousness around which way it would go.
Oh gosh, lots there. So one is being very intentional about ensuring that the ultimate decision maker is clearly identified. And those joining this call on my team know that we definitely subscribe to that. And it can't be multiple people. There's got to be, at the end of the day, a single decision maker. And then also striving to cast a wide but not reckless, so an intentional net to ensure that you get many, many, many diverse perspectives and views, as Dawn has talked about multiple times. And then I'm assuming, Stephen, that there was a lot of intention behind these word choices. They're considerations. What was the other?
Appreciations and considerations. What I really appreciate about that is XYZ, and I'd like you to consider ABC. And it's so important actually to frame those considerations as statements. We could ask questions for clarification, and we kind of make that distinction. What's the difference between a question for clarification and something I'd like you to consider that people frame as a question? Because if we're really rigorous about this, the answer, to like, I'd like you to consider that going in that direction is going to create all of these unintended consequences. And the appropriate answer there is thank you. And I could still ask questions like, well, what are those unintended consequences? And then thank you, right? So, but oftentimes when people share considerations, they share them as a question, and then we often feel compelled to answer a question when it's asked. It's some discipline to say thank you, and the thank you acknowledges that I actually am going to be making that decision. I've heard you, and I will take that into consideration.
Wonderful. Thank you. Dawn, I want to get your input. First, I want to share something that's very relevant to the point you made, Stephen, about the importance of ensuring that you close the loop with those that participated in the process and help them to understand, even if their idea wasn't adopted, how that input contributed to the ultimate solution. That brings to mind something I read recently, that a number of design thinkers and creative experts are in agreement that one of the sole components that weakens creativity has nothing to do with how the ideas are generated. It's how the ideas are treated. And this quote, I think, really drives it home. John Brownstein, Chief Innovation Officer of Boston Children's Hospital, said that less than 5% of all ideas shared are actionable. So you better handle the other 95% gently. So Dawn, in your experience, what advice do you have for handling all those ideas that aren't actionable gently?
Well, first of all, I love that the word gently was part of the advice. Wouldn't the workplace and the world be a better place if we treated one another gently? I think this directly builds on some of what Stephen said in that last example of what they do at Genentech. And I think there are things that happen in the process of receiving those ideas that are really important, and something at the beginning, the middle, and the end. And I think the beginning is really making sure you have a valid and clear intent. So there has to be a reason that you're asking people for their ideas. So, the person that you referenced, I think it's someone who works at a children's hospital. So maybe it's a suggestion box somewhere. But typically, when we're asking people for their ideas, there's a reason behind it. And so I think making sure you have a legitimate reason to want to know their ideas, and that you are legitimately intending to act on something, is important. It should be clear what you're asking people for and why. And I think also in that intent is sharing those expectations about what will happen with their input. Will it be considered, or will it be actioned, as Stephen mentioned? And so really making that clear from the outset that we want to hear your ideas so we can get to a better one. So it might not be that your idea is actioned, but it will be considered. That's really important. I think another, gently, with that valid intent, is that there is weighted input from people. So especially if you're asking for ideas from people who will be impacted by the decision that's made, their input into that for ideas is weighted. It's heavier than those who aren't affected or impacted by the decision. So I think making sure that you have a valid and clear intent, and that's clearly communicated, and those people who are end users, as you will, of those ideas, or have weighted input. And in the middle, I think there's that gratitude piece. Both of you have mentioned that. So thanking people from their ideas. Some people might give ideas to provoke a reaction, but I think the vast majority of people offer suggestions that they're serious about. And that takes time and energy and thought, and sometimes vulnerability, to offer suggestions. So those should be treated gently, with honor and with gratitude, even if 95% of them are unactionable. And then I think the end part is that feedback loop, that accountability that Stephen mentioned. So we see organizations make this mistake a lot. They ask people for ideas, they might say thank you, but then they don't ever go back and close that loop and say what was implemented as a result of the ideas they received. So we see this in surveys a lot. Clients will come and tell us, oh, they don't want to take another survey. Well, it might not be that they don't want to take another survey. It's just they don't want to take another survey that there's nothing done as a result of the input that they gave on their survey. So coming back and circling back is important. I think it can happen at the macro level as an organization and the micro level at a team. So, even in a meeting, be clear about why you're asking for ideas. Thank everyone, not just some. We sometimes tend to say, great idea, to one person and say, to another. So thank everyone for their ideas, indicate what's going to happen next with their ideas, and then circle back and tell them what happened as a result of their ideas.
Excellent. We've got some advice that a few folks have shared in chat that really build on what you're talking about, Dawn. Dan shares, as leaders, we owe our teams clarity and honesty. Part of that is that purpose, who that decision maker is, being transparent in terms of both positive support and constructive feedback to help people continue to grow. Very well said, Dan. And Beth adds, you may never get to those 5% of actionable ideas without those 95% being shared. Who knows? Maybe one of those non-actionable ones led to this discovery of the actionable ones. Excellent point. Yeah, that clearly resonates. Stephen, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think leaders don't necessarily pay enough attention to how they focus people's creativity. So like a great example of that is this site services facilities organization that I was working with. They had as their innovation challenge, they developed an innovation challenge, increase customer satisfaction with our services while reducing the cost of delivery of those services. And you can hear in that the tension, like, how are we going to do that? How are we going to reduce the cost of delivery, but increase customer satisfaction with our services, right? And it's that tension that sparks creativity and turns into innovations. And often leaders will not have a focus like that. They also are not necessarily paying attention to the what we call the innovation funnel, how the 1,000 flowers blooming quickly get tested and meet certain criteria to get investment and to pass through different stages in this innovation funnel and become solutions. So if you think about the design thinking process, right, we would want to prototype things that met certain criteria. Most leaders haven't defined those criteria, right? So without a focus and without criteria to help move and continue investments, we lose so much. And when those things are clear, I think the how it feels for my idea not to be adopted is much more understood, right? We have these clear criteria, we have a clear challenge. My idea didn't actually line up to that challenge at all, or it didn't pass through certain like a business case or some sense of return on investment from that, or how that would, let us leverage targets and so forth, right? So when all of those things are clear, it's not me who gets pushed down if my ideas aren't accepted. I have a clear accountability structure again for understanding that.
Gosh, excellent points. And that gets to the transparency that Dan was talking about. I think it also underscores how important that upfront work is before you cast that net, that upfront work to ensure that we are clearly defining our purpose and being audience-centric about it. So the way in which we articulate that purpose may have to be tailored depending on the audience and how it's going to resonate with them. Also making sure that that decision maker has been clearly defined and that decision maker is clear on the responsibility they have to treat those conversations very thoughtfully. And there was another point I was going to make. The criteria. I love how you talked about that criteria, Stephen. And I've experienced a lot of initiatives that kind of stall because as input is coming in, there isn't enough of a clearly defined lens through which to evaluate those ideas and make decisions, and also be able to test and prototype and discard things along the way. So much there. There was something else.
Harry,
Go ahead.
while you look at that, I'll just share. Like, the thing not to do is something that happened in our company when Genentech and Roche were integrating, and the whole group of senior managers came together and they asked the group for input and gathered all these ideas. And then when everyone went out on a break and when we came back, right, the brochures were printed and on the seats, right? So the decision had already been made, yet there was this request for input. And, that's a good example of, again, I love to learn from mistakes and failure. That was a good example of what not to do. Like, don't ask me for input if you've printed the brochure. Yeah, enough said.
Yeah. Thank you. That really drives the point home in terms of what not to do, and talk about eroding trust right off the bat. Rachel shares, simply capturing all ideas and publishing them after an ideation session can go a long way in making people feel heard. Absolutely. Providing the brochure doesn't accompany those ideas that were shared completely, because that shows that you're heard. It also provides wonderful fodder. Those ideas might not apply in this particular situation, but maybe they can be tapped into for another business benefit or initiative. So I'd love to bring all of this together, I think this would be very helpful for our audience by applying all of these ideas to a specific use case. One of our listeners is embarking on a major project and is seeking creative ways to engage a large multi-location group of stakeholders in developing a future vision for how they service their customers. What advice do you have? I'll start with you, Stephen.
Yeah, so creative ways to engage. That's the part that sticks out for me. So if creativity is something new, novel, a new approach, new solutions, right, that are resonant because they take into account constraints and viability and so forth, right? So creative ways to engage. I read into this like, how is it going to be different from the ways we engaged before? So I would say, like, what ways have we used to engage people before? What have been the outcomes and results of those? And then, and what are the constraints that we have in engaging, this large group or this multi-location group? What are the constraints? And then what are some possibilities for new ways to engage? And I would say some things to think about. How can we bring people across the threshold into the unknown a little bit, right? If we're developing a vision and everything seems like it's pretty set, right? And there's no unknown to maybe be a little bit uncomfortable about, I would say maybe the solutions or the ideas are going to be a little closer to home or more familiar, right? The bigger the unknown, the more opportunity there is for something to be really different or disruptive or inventive, right? So how much unknown is there? Is it safe to speak up? Is there a clear focus that's guiding that exercise with people? Those things will really help the creativity come out, that the creativity that people already have, that'll help that come out. So that's a little bit of advice. Make sure the purpose is clear. Think about how much unknown there is, how much space in the unknown there is for people to play with. Safe to speak up and a clear focus.
Thank you, Stephen. And we got a little bit more clarification from Beth. She said, current process, 50 plus individuals across every business unit on a conference call with roughly 5 dominating the discussion.
Yeah.
Context, prior projects left certain business lines feeling unheard.
Yeah. So can I jump in here, Carrie? Just hearing more of that from you, Beth, that's super helpful to context, because my mind was going, the entire organization, how do you bring them all, but this here, 50 plus people, I think one of the first things that we would say is ground rules are essential. So first thing is essential purpose. What are we trying to do here together today? And that's always essential to get first out the door. And I would say preparing people before they come with this information. So what are we going to be doing? And then why is it important that we're going to be doing this? Because then you bring in engagement, right? So people really want to be there and engaged. And then how are we going to be doing it? And so send all 3 of those ahead of time. And I would say part of the how that we're going to do it is that we're all going to be on camera, because we're people interacting with each other, which means we're going to show up. We're going to be present. We're not going to be multitasking. We're going to give each other the time because we believe this is important. That goes back to the purpose, the why. We are going to value what each other says, which means we are not going to dominate with certain speakers. We're going to give each other equal airtime. We're going to inquire what each other has to say. We are going to source it in a way that allows us to gather it from everyone. So you got to be creative. That Dan, I see, says breakouts. Breakouts is one way, but you can also get dominators and breakouts. So you've got to lay some ground rules there. Polling is a great way. Using the chat is another great way. Also using different types of input gathering that allow for cross-cultural styles, right? So some people who may not want to be direct, some people who may be really direct, some people who are introverts, some people who are extroverts. So leveraging different tools while you're there can help. Sometimes that means you bring in tools where people can give anonymous input, right? So all of that making, having that set up. So knowing what you're doing and why, and then thinking a lot about how you're going to do it. And part of it is thinking, what could go wrong? Oh, we have 65 people on a call, and we've got those 5 people who are really going to want to speak. And if they're leaders and they speak first, then that shuts everything else down. So preparing people is also important.
Thank you. Thank you, Dawn. We've got some additional input here. This, I think, is somewhat on the lines of the breakouts. Design containers that allow all voices to be heard. Wish we could talk about that more, Stephen, but we're nearing the end of the hour. You have Stephen's contact information and Dawn if you want to explore this more. We also follow up all these events with a blog where we can go deeper on some of these topics. Oh my goodness. Dan shares using visual development tools, Miro board, et cetera, for real-time creating, voting, et cetera. Excellent. The one thing I'd like to add is that gets to the how that you mentioned, Dawn, is the importance of having a really skilled, strong facilitator. And it isn't necessarily the leader of the initiative, right? Okay, let's close. We could go on and on. Thank you so much. This has been such a rich conversation with you and with our audience. I'd love to just quickly close. If our audience remembers nothing else, what's the one piece of advice that you'd like to leave off this discussion with? Dawn, I'll start with you.
You can create the conditions in which people on your team can do their best work and be their most creative. And that sometimes starts as simply as asking, hey, I want to know how you see this.
Wonderful. Stephen?
Yeah, I would say if you think your story about who you are as a creator is too small for you and it's restricting you, you can change it. You can move to that new story, and that will make a huge difference, not only for you, but for your team, for your organizations. Bring that creativity up on stage with you. If it's sitting, in the first row of the theater or way up in the balcony or maybe out in the lobby or, back in the wings waiting for something, bring it up on stage with you. It is one of your most powerful resources and most sustainable resources for achieving the goals that you're seeking.
Love that. You can change your story. And we all have the creative potential within us. It's about creating that right circumstance and the right mindset. Thank you so very much. This has been a terrific, fulfilling conversation. Hopefully, our audience has gained a great deal, and we'd love to close out by giving you a preview of next month's PowerSpeaking Live topic. Also, for those in the audience, if you have any suggestions or asks on future topics, please drop them in chat. Spontaneous communication with Matt Abrams is the topic we'll be exploring next month.